Actor, comedian, musician Russell Brand is now an accused rapist. The star charged by UK police with rape and sexual assault, and he's not staying quiet.
I was a drug addict, a sex addict, and an imbecile, but what I never was a rapist.
His response to the criminal charges and the allegations being made by 4 separate women, according to police, will dive into what we know and what he has to say about it. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Russell Brand is known for being loud and outspoken and controversial, and he has faced accusations of sexual misconduct in the British media for years. Now he is going to face them in court. These are the charges the 50-year-old performer is facing according to Metropolitan Police in the United Kingdom. 1 count of rape, 1 count of indecent assault, 1 count of oral rape, and 2 counts of sexual assault. Police say these charges are related to events that happened between 1999 and 2005. We'll get into what we know about these accusations in just a moment, but first let's break down what we know about Russell Brand. He rose to fame in the early 2000s in the UK as a comedian, then went on to host TV shows and work for MTV. Eventually, his popularity landed him roles in some big movies in the United States. You might remember Forgetting Sarah Marshall, that was in 2008. It was a huge success. It grossed more than $63 million at US box offices. In 2010, he was in another hit movie, Get Him to the Greek. It's another comedy. His co-host in that film, Sean Diddy Combs, which given today's news and Diddy's legal troubles, that movie certainly has people talking. Brand also famously married singer Katy Perry in 2010. They divorced in late 2011 when Brand reportedly sent Perry a text message telling her he wanted to end their marriage. And that was just before she was set to go out and perform in front of a large crowd. Over the years, Brand has spoke out about his faith and his politics, but his positions on those issues have changed. In 2012, he once appeared with the Dalai Lama. Over the pandemic, Brand's politics turned more anti-vaccine, and he's now a vocal supporter of President Trump. In 2024, he was baptized as a Christian. I bring all of this up not to have some sort of political discussion, but because it will make sense when you hear his response to the allegations that police have leveled this week. Let's talk about those allegations and the charges that Brand is now facing. The Metro Police say these charges are a result of an investigation that started in September 2023. Police say they received a number of allegations against Brand in the wake of reporting by UK media outlets Channel 4 and the Sunday Times, who aired allegations of sexual abuse against Brand from a number of accusers in the documentary. The charges that we're talking about today, according to police, are from an incident in 1999 when a woman was allegedly raped in the south of England, in 2001 when a woman was allegedly indecently assaulted in London, in 2004 when a woman was allegedly orally raped and sexually assaulted in London, and between 2004 and 2005 when a woman was allegedly sexually assaulted once again in London, and police say these are incidents from 4 separate women. The lead investigator in the case from the Metro Police wrote, quote, "The women who have made reports continue to receive support from specially trained officers. The Met's investigation remains open, and detectives ask anyone who has been affected by this case or anyone who has information to come forward and speak with police." Now, as for Brand, he was quick to respond on his social media channels.
Hello. Firstly, thank you for these incredible and overwhelming messages of support. We're very fortunate in a way to live in a time where there's so little trust in the British government. We're very fortunate, I suppose, that this is happening at a time where we know that the law has become a kind of weapon to be used against people, institutions, and sometimes entire nations that will not accept and tolerate levels of corruption that are unprecedented. I'm speaking particularly to those of you that are watching this in the UK. How do you feel about your legal system right now? How do you feel about some of the high-profile cases that are not being pursued and prosecuted? How do you feel that the Southport murders were handled? How do you feel about the government of Keir Starmer? Now, that's just sort of general context. I've always told you guys that when I was young and single, before I had my wife and family, who were just out of shot over there, my beautiful children, I was a fool, man. I was a fool before I lived in the light of the Lord. I was a drug addict, a sex addict, and an imbecile. But what I never was was a rapist. I've never engaged in non-consensual activity. I pray that you can see that by looking in my eyes. I want to thank all of you for your continuing support. I want to let you know that our show will be on Rumble on Monday. Thanks for your support there. And of course, I'm now going to have the opportunity to defend these charges in court, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. In the meantime, you lot, stay free, and we will be continuing to discuss this matter. Praise the Lord.
So you hear Brand leading with what he's known for now as someone who's very much into his politics, very much into his faith, before he gets to the allegations and the charges to which he says he denies. You also heard him talking about his children. Seemed like he was on vacation somewhere. After he divorced Katy Perry, he married an author named Laura Gallagher, who now goes by Laura Brand. They got married in 2017, and they have 3 kids together. As far as where this case is expected to go next in the legal system, police say Russell Brand is set to appear in court on May 2nd. Joining us now from London is criminal solicitor Nick Brett. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today as this news has come down about Russell Brand. What do you make of these charges he's now facing?
Well, he's been under investigation for some time, and the Crown Prosecution Service have now made a decision to charge him with 1 count of rape, 1 count of oral rape, 1 sexual assault, or 2 sexual assaults actually, with 4 different women. So this is an investigation that really started as a result of a program called Dispatches that was aired about 3 years ago, detailing allegations that had been made during the time when Russell Brand was really quite a popular broadcaster in the United Kingdom in the sort of early to mid 2000s. And so I think people have been aware about the prospect of him being charged with offences for some time.
Yeah, it's fascinating because in these charges, it's related. One is for a case reportedly in 1999, and then 2001, 2004, and then between 2004 and 2005. And then there's allegations that go all the way, I think, to 2013. And I think about Russell Brand's career, and you had in the United States, Forgetting Sarah Marshall was a really popular movie in 2008. Of course, he was married to Katy Perry for a period of time, which would be after when these reportedly happened. The dates of these, and to go back to say a case that apparently happened in 2001 in UK court, how is that viewed when it comes to, I think in the United States, like a statute of limitations type issue? Is that something that happens in UK court?
We don't have a statute of limitations for criminal allegations unless they are very minor allegations. So what are called summary offences have to be tried within 6 months. There's no time limit in respect of any other offence. In fact, it's really quite commonplace for sexual offences in particular to be tried many, many years after the event. I mean, sometimes with with offences, for example, involving child abuse that took place 40, 50 years ago, those allegations can be tried before a Crown Court. So it's really quite commonplace. The Russell Brand investigation, is part of I suppose, a pattern of investigations that have been brought about in more recent times because the alleged victims of this kind of offending have been, slightly more emboldened to come forward, given the support that they've received in the media and from other places in order to make allegations. So it's not really unusual.
What type of evidence would someone need to have to come forward for Russell Brand to be facing criminal charges as opposed to it playing out in the public, the publicity court as those allegations and the programs had brought forward for years against Russell Brand?
Well, I mean, given the age of the allegations, it's quite unlikely that there will be any forensic evidence. So it will be testimony. Usually the victims of sexual offences are video interviewed and they give their accounts, and that is evidence. There may, of course, be other evidence in the form of messaging, media messaging of some sort, but given the age of the allegations, it's probably unlikely. So I would imagine, although I don't know, that the allegations against Russell Brand will be based almost purely on the testimony of the four complainants.
In your experience, because in the United States, sometimes the he said, she said argument is not enough to get a conviction for prosecutors. But in the UK, with typically how a court can view that, knowing that there's no statute of limitations, how does that typically play out in cases where it is a victim's word against someone who, in this case, is someone, though controversial, a very popular person?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have quite a low conviction rate here for allegations of rape and sexual assault, and that has been the subject of quite a lot of media commentary and criticism. I think quite unfairly, criticism of prosecutors and the police sometimes. I mean, the difficulties that Russell Brand is likely to face are the fact that there's more than one complainant. I suspect that the Crown Prosecution Service will seek to have the matter tried, or have the allegations tried together. All four complainants in front of the same jury. And so, really the impression that that is given to the jury will depend upon the evidence that is given before them, the cross-examination of the complainants, the evidence given by Russell Brand, both in chief and under cross-examination, if he chooses to give evidence. But obviously, it's difficult for me to comment on the sort of strength of the evidence in the case without knowing. I mean, we're not entitled to know much information about the case at this juncture.
Yeah, and at the time of this recording, I mean, we learned about these charges against Russell Brand really in the last hour or so. So we're
That's
kind of just
right.
picking up information as we go. I think of the fact that many of these dates happened before he was, at least in the United States, a very popular name. It would have happened during a time when, prior to more international fame for him, he was a big name in the UK. I think starting as a stand-up comedian. I know he's done a lot of different things. Was it not until the documentary came forward just in the last couple of years that people heard or started to hear that there were rumblings about allegations like this, which now he's charged?
I think that's right. I think that there have been subsequent allegations that complaints were made to broadcasters about his behaviour, which has featured in press articles and in documentary programmes about this. I mean, he was, as you rightly say, an extraordinarily popular comedian and a very, very talented broadcaster, both on radio and television. In the late 1990s, up until throughout the 2000s, really, there was a scandal involving him and Jonathan Ross, which you may or may not recall, in 2008, when they telephoned Andrew Sachs, who's a sort of very popular and much loved actor here in the United Kingdom, and they left a message on live TV on his answer phone, in which reference was made to the fact that Russell Brand had had sex with his granddaughter, and it was a big scandal. And I suppose his broadcasting career here in the United Kingdom was quite badly damaged as a result of that. Although I know he went on to have a very successful career in Hollywood.
Yeah, he did. And one movie I think about today, I know I mentioned Forgetting Sarah Marshall, but there's a movie, Get Him to the Greek, where his co-star is Sean Diddy Combs. So people certainly going to be looking at that film a little bit different and looking at the cast of it different, now seeing what Russell Brand is now charged with. What are some of the biggest differences that you would say between U.S. court and how the legal process could look like going on from here, and what he will face in UK court?
I think probably the biggest difference between the criminal proceedings in the US and criminal proceedings in the UK is that once somebody is charged with a criminal offence, and even before they're charged, they have before they're charged, they have an expectation of privacy, which obviously in this case was particularly difficult given the provenance of the individual and the nature of the way in which the complaints came about and the level of press interest. But once somebody's been charged with an offence, really that's it, and the media aren't able to publish any information about it. other than what is said in open court, which in the administrative hearings that lead up to trial tends to be, fairly bland. And so probably the outline of the prosecution case even wouldn't become clear until the case is opened at trial. I think in the United States, the system is quite different. And I think that there is often quite a lot of publicity, which is generated pre-trial. And people are interviewed live on television and discuss the case in a way that doesn't happen over here. So I think that they're the predominant differences. When it comes to the actual trial process itself, generally speaking, quite similar. The prosecution introduces a case, it sets out its case, it calls its witnesses, so cross-examines, the defence call their witnesses, and then we have, closing speeches, and the jury is sent out to decide.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear you talk about that, because I think of Russell Brand and just the attention in the last hour or so since this news broke about what he's charged with and the conversation. I mean, we're talking about this right now. So moving forward, though, once the proceedings begin, like if you were to turn on the BBC, there would not be the same type of coverage that you might get in the United States if this was a US case.
If you read the reports from the UK press, all you will see, actually, when you read it, is what he's been charged with. And there'll be a brief statement from the police and the Crown Prosecution Service about the fact of the charge and about the fact that nobody ought to say anything about it. We have a quite important protection for the victims of sexual offences in this country, which means that they are entitled to lifelong anonymity if they've made a complaint about a sexual offence. And that is a protection that's taken very, very seriously indeed. And anybody who took any steps in order to breach that anonymity would find themselves in hot water, facing criminal allegations themselves, potential contempt proceedings. Whilst there may be speculation, the extent of that speculation may well be much more in depth in the United States. Over here, you will find that there really isn't much published until the trial begins. And the trial process, well, he's appearing at court, I think, in early May. That will be a magistrate's court. He'll be sent up to the Crown Court. He'll appear in the Crown Court in June. I'm sure he'll almost certainly contest the charges, in which case he's probably unlikely to face trial until sometime in 2026. So it's going to be a fairly long process, during which there's likely to be a news void, really, in connection with the case over here.
Yeah, and how likely is it that facing these charges that Russell Brand could be held behind bars ahead of a trial happening?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, it's difficult to properly comment without knowing a little bit more.
Sure.
I mean, the basis upon which somebody can be remanded in custody in this country pre-trial is if there are serious concerns that they may not attend trial, so they may leave the jurisdiction. B, that there are serious concerns that they may offend or continue to offend if they were not remanded in custody. Or C, that they may interfere with justice. So, I mean, he's quite a prominent figure, on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think that it would be difficult, and also the allegations are old. So I think it would be very difficult for the prosecution to persuade a court that he needed to be remanded in custody, unless he took some step, which I'm sure he wouldn't do, perhaps to try to leave the jurisdiction.
And going back to how effective a he said, she said argument can be for the defense, at least in the United States, from what I've seen in cases involving alleged sexual abuse. I know Russell Brand, to the allegations that he's faced based off of documentaries to that point, has said that many of his sexual encounters, he believes they were consensual. How does that argument, and again, I know that there's a lot of stuff we don't know yet about the evidence that's going to be brought forward, but generally speaking, when you see cases like this, where there may not be that physical evidence, and then you have a defendant saying, hey, this was consensual, and there's really no way other than that victim's voice to be able to prove it one way or the other, how do juries in the UK typically see that?
Well, I mean, the only defence really to an allegation of this nature, other than that it didn't happen, is that it was consensual, and I suspect that is likely to be his defence in this case. Um, there are many cases that are prosecuted purely on the say-so of the victim. I mean, I can't speak for the strength or otherwise of the evidence in this particular case because I don't know enough about it. But it would rather depend on how that individual comes across in court, how they come across under cross-examination, and likewise how he comes across if he chooses to give evidence, and what is said. And of course, it may well be that the prosecution case will be made out in connection with one or more victims, but not all of them. It may be that he's acquitted of everything. It may be that I mean, it's just very, very difficult to tell and know, isn't it? I mean, whether or not he would allege, for example, there was some kind of collusion between the victims or some form of political campaign to ensure that he is charged. I mean, there are all sorts of potential ramifications at trial, but without knowing more, it's obviously difficult to say specifically.
No, absolutely. I also think of if he was convicted of these charges, I mean, these are very serious charges that he's accused of. What type of time, what type of punishment could Russell Brand be facing if all of this, these, at least at this point, several charges that he's facing, if those were found to be true and a jury convicts him?
Well, if you're convicted of rape in this country, then a custodial sentence is almost inevitable. The length of that custodial sentence would depend on the nature of the allegations. So, for example, rape cases that are sort of loosely described as date rape, for example, or rape between partners would be viewed less seriously than, for example, what is commonly referred to as stranger rape. So somebody attacked in a park or in an alleyway or something of that nature would be more serious. But custody would be inevitable, and again, if there was, if there were convictions for more than one complainant, then that would be an aggravating feature. A judge would have to consider whether or not he imposed what are called consecutive sentences, so sentences that run one after the other, or whether to impose concurrent sentences, which are sentences that run along side by side. And if he imposes concurrent sentences or consecutive sentences, he would need to decide what the total sentence ought to be. So I think, look, again, it's slightly difficult for me to say without knowing more about the case, but certainly it is right to say that if convicted, custody would be inevitable. I couldn't tell you how long he would get.
And I just think of Russell Brand as the celebrity. I would say, at least in the United States, his height of popularity it's been over for a good period of time. I would say once he got divorced from Katy Perry in 2012, you didn't hear as much about Russell Brand anymore. He made some controversial statements in the pandemic. He's made comments about politics in the US, but in terms of being the person he was when, like, Forgetting Sarah Marshall was in the box office, those days feel like they're long gone. What do you feel is the reaction just from the public in the UK? Not as much asking you as an attorney, but just in general, when people hear this news, what's typically the reaction going to be in the UK to hearing that Russell Brand's been charged with these?
I don't think there would be surprise that he's been charged. I mean, I think it's a story that's almost in a way quite an old story, because there was a big, there was this Dispatches documentary which probably aired 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, so quite some time ago, and there was quite a lot of talk at that time as part of a sort of wider discussion, relating to the Me Too movement and prominent male celebrities who have been accused of sexual misconduct. So I think that it's a case that's been deep in the British psyche for some time. I don't think there will be an enormous amount of surprise that criminal charges have been brought. I mean, certainly it's been known for quite some time that Crown Prosecution Service were considering charges.
And it'll be fascinating to see how this case plays out with Russell Brand. He's due in court in May, and we'll see where things go from there. Nick Brett joining us from the United Kingdom, from London. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Great pleasure, Chris. Thank you very much.
In that documentary that was aired by Channel 4 in the United Kingdom, Russell Brand denied all wrongdoing. He also said that all his relationships have been, quote, always consensual. For On the Case, presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.